RED policy implementation. So, Professor Ariel will have two topics to be discussed, but before that, we want to invite our director, LPM, Ibu Riyatu, and also colleague from CIFOR, Peter Spimo, to explain about the project. First, maybe we are here to open the section. Thank you. Good morning. It's actually the week of the exam, but I hope this is still also recorded in YouTube Ariel. So we can stop taking on. Thank you for coming to silent and for sharing the context into deepest, taking them from textbooks to the younger as well as the non-media academic team. We are happy for your visit to Saiba and the research taking on what have been done in this area, and also taking into account what's the improvement in this area, which should be is our interest also as research in LPM here. A little bit of LPM. We are a research institute established in 1953, and currently we have 7 research groups, and one of the research, actually the newest research group, is on environmental economics, head by my colleague here, Anu Kalimatu Satya. Although this is the new research group, I think collaborations and the area of research in this context is quite expanding as well. So, without further ado, again, thank you as well for the CIFOR. We hope also the collaboration between CIFOR and LPM will be the skill and job. Yes. Thank you, Ibu Riyatu, for the opening remarks. Next, I will invite Bimo Dwi Satrio. He is a senior research officer at CIFOR, and he in charge in the project Global Comparative Study on RED Plus and RED policy. So I said it right. And he studied social anthropology and graduated from Universitas Indonesia, faculty of social and also graduated from Crawford School of Public Policy, Australian National University. Yeah, must be more. For exchanges.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Bimo Dwi Satrio. I'm a research officer in CIFOR and also country coordinator for Indonesia in this project that we call Global Comparative Study on Plastic. I would like to send in our highest gratitude to FFWI for hosting us today. Riyatu, Iqbalin, terima kasih banyak telah menerima kami hari ini, and also for hosting Ariel, CIFOR team, and also RCCUI this morning. And also special thanks for all the committee that makes today possible. So this lecture is linked closely and also part of the Global Comparative Study RED Plus project phase 4. And in this phase, we are emphasizing co-production knowledge and sharing our lesson learned for the past 10 years since the first phase of the project. So we hope that we can not only learn from Professor Ariel today from this presentation, but also have active discussions. So can exchange ideas and also strengthen research in this topic. And in particular on breakfast issues. So I wish you all today have an interesting discussion today. And again, thank you all for your attention and also collaboration. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mas Bemo, for explaining the activity by CIFOR together with Ariel. I want to explain a little bit about Ariel. Prof. Ariel Engelson is the professor at the Norwegian University of Life Science and also senior associate of CIFOR. He has conducted extensive research and published on cause of tropical deforestation and its interaction with poverty, tenure and government policy. And since 2007, his main focus is on the RED plus initiative. So Professor Ariel will present two topics today. First is RED plus implementation at global Indonesia, and the second one is deforestation, diagnostic and archetypes, and production and modification. Please, Prof. Ariel.
Thank you. I do. Yeah. No, but it's oh, yes. So let me, if I can push here so I can watch it, so you don't only see my back. So thank you very much for inviting me. It's an issue is close to my heart since I came here as a PhD student in Tanzania for working in the jungle. This is not the jungle. I just want to show you. This is the area where I grew up, 68 degrees north, the neighboring island. This is, we have a lot of nice nature that I hope you have a chance to visit one day. As you said, I'm going to talk about two topics. One, I have had different versions with some taking the economics to the jungle because that or REDD, as you call it here, or the red, it's about a very simple idea that we try to implement. I'm going to explain that idea. I'm also said to Sandy that another title I've used is how to buy a forest. How do you really buy a forest? It could be the alternative way of presenting it. So, and then for the second half, more about what's called deforestation diagnostics. I think it's a very exciting approach. This diagnostics, how to use it to address a problem. So, just some very key facts. Tropical forests have received kind of a lot of attention since for the last 15 years that in climate negotiation. If you look at greenhouse gas emissions, I like to have this simple rules of thumb that about a third of the emissions in the past, normally say in the Industrial Revolution last 250 years or so, to 1/3 is related to land use changing, particularly loss of forest. Currently, about 10%, 10-12% to heat, and in the future, more cost-effective emission reductions. It's about 1/3. If you look at the distribution across the three main continents, about 60% in South America or Latin America, half of that, 30% in Brazil. You look at Africa, about 20%, 10% in one country, namely the Democratic Republic of Congo. And for Asia, another 20% and 10% in one country, only RE now. So that's about the key role. We are focusing a lot on fossil fuel emissions, but land use and forest is very important. Also want to give you a little bit of history so we are on the same page, and then present some of the simple theories and how my basic understanding of what we are trying to do, both about the race between forest and agricultural range and how to make a market for emission reductions. Then how that has evolved and some thoughts of the future. So it's like a quick speed date of red. I'm talking a little bit about Norway, basically because Adam said this, and the key to prosperity is division of labor and exploiting comparative advantage. And I guess I know more about Norway than you. You know more about Indonesia than me, so better that I talk about Norway. Because Norway is a very funny country. We are up north, this picture shows the islands here. In the northern part of Europe, that has become a kind of a superpower already. Maybe about half of the international funding. And in Bali, in 2007, committed to have 3 billion Norwegian kroner. If you want the dollar, you just divide by 10. It used to be 6, but now it's to the US dollar. So, and it has been leading a lot of that with large bilateral agreements and a lot of funding for the UN projects. Norway, I would say, brought quite uncritically into the idea of the self-based payment. And the rhetoric that has been, I'm saying rhetoric because it's also kind of a strong wave and trend, for example, within development aid. We should have a self-based payment, paying only for results. And we thought it is a good idea. I still keep adding myself that I still believe in it, but I think it's also, I see a lot of problems and issues that we look into. It's also kind of, you should look at the donors and what is their role, or former Prime Minister once said, it's typical for Norwegians to do good. So we like to save the world, as someone said, to be a humanitarian superpower. It's also used kind of basic economic thinking. So where should you do emission reductions? And of course, it gives you a view to say you should do it where it's cheaper. And that reducing emissions from deforestation is a cheap way. And it has been possible to, at least until recently, to de-link on oil and gas exploration and climate action in Norway, because you can do it abroad where it's cheaper and you get more bang for your bucks, so to speak. And it's the sound of me, isn't it? Or should I hold close? Closely. I think our final point is that Norway is a rich country. And I just illustrated with this oil or spot. Call it oil channel for short. It's $1.4 trillion, which is about $250,000, $250,000 per Norwegian. So we can afford it. It's the Bali COP meeting, Conference of the Parties, which is this annual meeting under the Climate Convention, was held in Bali in 2007 in Sadua, finished exactly 15 years ago, and they defined what that is. It's the positive incentives, positive meaning that only carrots and no stick, on the perceived project in developing countries, and developing is defined very broadly, so it's also middle income countries. So Singapore, for example, if they have forest, then we should qualify technically for this. And it's also the conservation, which may be interpreted to mean that it's also for paying to conserve forests, although not necessarily emission reduction, just to keep what is there without having any reductions basin, and sustainable management of forests. That's the definition. I think a year after I was in Bogor, and this, there are some famous graphs in economics, for example, the Laffer curve, but that was drawn on a napkin in a restaurant. So this was actually, I think, drawn in the canteen at CIFOR in Bogor, plus figured out. Shaila, that's German scientist, and I was sitting there, what is the core idea of red? And I still use that figure to illustrate, I think it's called a sheep, made it nice. But it's at the international level, you have containers. Don't, for example, national development, like the new environmental fund in Indonesia. Here, and then you have red payments so to land users, to local governments, and projects. And in return, you have this verified emission reduction. So this kind of two-stage process of paying for results. This was the core idea of that. Payment for environmental services as you this is expected in return for verified certified emission reductions. So just a quick history. I already talked about this. Norway launched this initiative. A lot of other initiatives came along. We should have a new Kyoto Protocol type of agreement in Copenhagen in 2009. That failed. Really, the ambition was to create this global carbon market where that could be part of, that you could use for offsetting, that you have the cap and trade system where you took on a commitment and you could meet it by reducing own reductions or by buying credits in the market. That did not happen. 2010, the Norway-Indonesia deal, after 2 years after Brazil got its deal, why shouldn't Indonesia also get its 3 countries? So you got a similar $1 billion agreement between Norway. And then you had a lot of these meetings. They continued with annual talks, COPs, Warsaw in 2013. You got like a package where you set the rules of the game. Number of decisions about the requirements, about the plan, about this monitoring, reporting, verification system. So I tweeted that the rules of the game are ready. The players are welcome to join. And the players is both those who are willing to pay and those who are willing to play, as the old former director of CIFOR used to say. So those who are willing to pay to buy credits and those who are willing to play the game, that is deliver the credits. At the same time, this green climate movement was started around that time, based in South Korea. That was a standing arm of the UN Convention on Climate Change. Paris, we can jump to that, where the old cap and trade system was gone. You got a bottom-up system with so-called NDCs, nationally determined contributions for each country, tell what they have said to do, and you cannot come and say that Indonesia cannot say, okay, I really think the US should do more. You can, you accept it, it's nationally determined, so you should not say. There are some rules, for example, that you cannot lower your ambitions. The next time, and it's updated every 5 years, you have to come with something that is same or better or more ambitious than them. I like to use this quote from The Guardian after the Paris meeting. As I said, by comparison to what it could have been, it's a miracle. By comparison to what it should have been, it's a disaster. So it's kind of the political reality. Good job by the French in getting the agreement. That's a miracle. But what about the environmental climate perspective? It's the opposite. So you have this major setback in Brazil because the regime president that is 2 weeks left now. And Indonesia promising signs perhaps part of the moratorium that was introduced in 2011. And we got also lately last year a new initiative, just want to talk about because I think it has been debated in Indonesia, namely the lowering emissions by accelerating forest finance, launched last year by, I think the most prominent in Norway, UK, and the US in this, but it's a combination of private and public funding. 50% should come from private companies. There are about 20 that have joined. Maybe the most prominent is the Amazon forest, Amazon.com, by Nestle, Unilever, Airbnb, a few others are obviously kind of big international companies are there. So 50-50, 1 billion has been committed, and the price, I should have added that, they paid $10 per ton, not 5 that has been usual, for example, from Biocarbon Fund and from Norway's agreement with Brazil and Indonesia, Guyana and others. With self-based payment, so this, they have introduced a new standard that is stricter than the UNFCCC standard of R3 certification, and the same because it's stricter, it's higher quality, intent instead of height. So this has been a somewhat controversial, including elected and Ministry of Environment, the provinces of Indonesia saying that should not enter this, partly because we bypass the national level. We can make an agreement with the provinces or the state in other countries, in the subnational level. So that's been one of, I think, the problematic issues. Another one, yet another standard. There are many standards being launched by the different organizations, World Bank, UN, bilateral, UNFCCC, R3, etc. So you have more than a dozen or more standards and different certification schemes. If you go into the voluntary market, there's even more standards. And that is creating some discussion and debates. My water. This is not anything. And it's also the fact that you made the 4 windows of this. So who owns the emission reductions? So window 1, it's kept with the jurisdiction, the project. In window 4, it's the company that can buy it and use it. So for example, if you have a leaf project in Kalimantan Timor, you will have to, under window 4, say Amazon buys it, they can use it as offset, and Indonesia cannot use it as part of its NDCs. So they have sole kind of the right to the emission reduction. Should be no double counting. So that has also been an issue, also in the negotiations, how to deal with that. So here's some bit basic economic theory, and we are going back to a nice book that was published recently, 1826. And the Fontinen model, Johann Fontinen, who is the kind of the founder of economic geography. And Fontinen was, is this coming automatically? Make some. Fontinen was a German farmer and geographer, economist, who studied kind of the prices of rye in Germany at that time, 200 years ago. And he said this theory: what will be the land use if it's chosen with, he used this term, the actual rationality? That is, you put the land into the use that is most valuable for the land. So basic, the highest land rent the property get from the land. And he was particularly concerned with the distance from Lübeck, the city in Germany. But we can do it here, distance or we just ordered it in terms of declining agricultural rent. So just define from agricultural rent as the difference. You have a gross income here, the price and the yield. This is per hectare basis. You have the rate cost, you have maintenance capital cost, and you have some distance cost. So this here, why it's my fault. And so it's the distance here. Now, what will be the open access solution? Well, the open access solution is where there's no kind of forest rent. You just do it. You can have private property rights and still the private forest benefits, timber is included. So include the forest rent. So the optimal use is in this point. The second level, you have some public goods produced by the forest. Some of these public goods are at the local level. So if you move the decision making to the community level, you should include the community benefits. So community forest management, you're here. You include some of the forest rent, the rent of keeping the land in forests. So say you have timber here, you may have some water catchment, you may have some pollination services, you may have collection of firewood from the forest. These are here. But then the biodiversity and carbon benefits is at the global level. So in order to capture that, you have to include you have to find a mechanism so those making the decisions also take that into account. You need a PES system, payment for environmental services. So you have this race between the agriculture and forest rents here. And it's if you use the utmost rationality, like Conditional said, you'll get a system where if you have a good price system, you have this much in agriculture and the rest is in forest. So deforestation is only this part here, and the rest is forest. If you have open access, you're here. So 3 different ways of kind of reducing deforestation or making the decision maker capture the forest rent. The forest rent is there also, but it's public good, so it's not captured by those making the decision of this standard environmental explanation of environmental problems in terms of public goods or negative externalities. So the rate. So we can reduce deforestation by lowering agricultural rent, but the rent in this extensive upland agriculture. Prices, the yields, wages, capital cost, transport, etc. We can increase the forest rent by the value of forest products, or maybe that's what rent aims to do. We can increase the capture of forest rent by either private property, moving decisions to a high level, and this is in a way moving to even higher level, the global level, but having a global system like the red. So that's kind of the core idea, I would say, textbook to the general. Now, how to create a market, how to create this test market that we just looked at. And 4 elements that are essential to make a market. You need something to buy and sell, not to certified emission reductions. You need someone to buy it, and you need to sell it, and you need some rules of the game. Marketplace, some requirements, reputation systems. Yeah. So, here are some of the challenges of creating a market. First, you have to define the commodity or the service that you are working on. So, an emission reduction is a very critical thing in theory. It's a reference level minus the actual emissions. Business as usual compared to what's happening. That's the impact. So, those of you working on impact assessment, RED is an impact assessment exercise. It's about reducing emissions. So, how do you do that and how do you measure? So, the actual emissions should not be too difficult, although it has been difficult in the past. It's using this IPCC standard, the activity data, as it's called, which is the land which changed from many hectares, changed from forest cover to cover. And then you have the emission factors, which is the carbon lost when you convert a piece of land from forest to, say, a rice field. That's the one. And you actually do have some uncertainty here on the emission factor. So a lot of uncertainty, it's not as simple as we think. This probably have better data. The actual land use change. But you are also getting good maps on how much carbon is used. But there's also tricky, you have below ground carbon, how much is released. For example, if you have a peatland, it's a process that goes over decades. So it's not just a one-time emission and last for as long. The second is this counterfactual, the reference level or baseline that you have to estimate, which is not easy. I'll give you two illustrations from the two big countries. Brazil first, this is the actual deforestation in Brazil. So up here peaked in 2004 and then went down a lot. So huge variation and then picked up again, and we don't know if this is a trend. There are different ways to set it. In the Amazon front, they said last 10 years. So the reference levels were here and here. You can see here the difference in reference level and natural emissions, huge emission reductions. The first year when Norway signed the agreement, 2009, it's actually Brazil should have gotten $2 billion for its emission reductions. But they also have another baseline, which is the official that Brazil has submitted to the UNFCCC Climate Convention, which is 96 until today, and is updated regularly. So that's a much higher reference level than you have in the last few weeks. So did Brazil reduce its emissions in 2019, for example? Well, it all depends on the reference level you choose. You go for the Amazon plan, you go for the other one that the government submitted. There's somewhere in between these two. So the counterfactual, you can tell different stories. If you look at the Indonesian one, it's, you see these are the energy cost of fuel emissions, and we have agriculture here, we have blue, which is of course other land uses and heat, waste in the total here. So you see kind of fossil fuel emission typically for a country pretty stable. Some slowdown in COVID 2020, but a lot more variation here in the emissions from deforestation and forest degradation. And to step what is the normal here? Easy from here, much more difficult for the emissions. So how you do that? I looked at you looked at the submissions in 56 to the UN, and some used trend. For example, if you look until 2015, Indonesia took a main kind of trend line and see it's going to increase and have a very high one. They were taking the average here, which would have given a different baseline. Should you start if you include 2006, it was a high year, or not? Where do you start? So it's a lot of tricky question with no clear answer how to set the reference level. Who are the sellers? Who is producing the emission reductions? Is it a project? It may be some policies, a road that is not built, a moratorium that is introduced. Is it the government? Is it the concession not given? Is it the palm oil company that was not given the concession? It's tricky, and again, there's no obvious straightforward answer about what is you are the seller. So we have this benefit sharing mechanism that, okay, some to the central government, local, maybe down to community, perhaps down to the individual household and farmers, as is in some countries where you have payments directly. Who are the buyers? I may say it's a global willingness to pay for emission reductions that we try to capture in a way. We can do it by public funding. So I pay tax, and some of those taxes go to development aid, and then again used to buy emission reductions. Voluntary markets that went up 4 times in last year and has really taken off. Whether it's a permanent trend or not, we don't know. Carbon markets, it's possible, but carbon markets are created by giving caps to those that emit. That is an obstacle. So how to get buyers is not easy, and it has to be created because we may have a willingness to pay, but we have to capture that and translate it into cash that is used in the market. And finally, the institutions to do this, from the national level to the local level, contract design and enforcement. You may have biases in the reporting that you have to deal with, asymmetric information, a lot of the familiar problems. And it's also the nature of the emission reductions. They used to, as an example, say with coffee. If I buy coffee, I would like good coffee because I drink it, I consume it. If I am a country or a business, I have my own company, I will buy emission reductions. What I want is a paper allowing me to emit more to meet my kind of target for how much I should emit. So I'm interested in a certified paper that I can use to comply with some regulations. And I'm not going to eat it for breakfast. And the same with the sellers, they want the money. So you need a good verification system. It's not kind of a commodity like coffee that we can check the quality as easy by drinking it. So it's an extra challenge to do that. So taking some stock of RED and what has happened so far. I think if I want to summarize, it was a very simple idea, kind of textbook idea to the children, about let's pay farmers, local governments, countries for reducing emissions. Result-based. You can document that you have done it, you pay them. Project. But it has met a complex reality. Things are more difficult in practice, and they're also somehow difficult. Used to say that is not only difficult in practice, it's also difficult in theory. Because, for example, who are the sellers? If you have a policy reform, who is the rightful owners of those emission reductions produced? So it has met a complex reality and also kind of a political reality of vested interest, and it has evolved a bit with time. So one of the questions we asked has RED worked, and in 2018, a group of people editing a book called Transforming RED, Lessons and New Direction by CIFOR. And I remember this figure that was constructed to me when one of the authors produced it. 2007, Bali, 2017, sorry, 18, where we were to almost double the forest loss. It has RED work. And if you look quickly, you say, no, it has. Of course, what was the counterfactual? It would have been even worse. But in terms of this should have come down. If you have now, we are still here. Some fluctuation with COVID, at least for Indonesia, reduced deforestation. So it's hard to have good impact studies. It's hard to do that, and there are fewer than hoped. But the short summary that we have in the book is that national RED policies, they show some significant, you should maybe add statistically significant reductions, but the effect size is relatively small. So significant in a statistical sense, but not in an economic or climate sense. Local RED initiatives projects, most modest, again, with positive outcomes. So at least we haven't done any harm on either this or well-being. Although the well-being effects are limited and somehow mixed, if you have these positive incentives, that is some payments, obviously the well-being livelihoods economic impact on the local population is better. But you may also have this, what's called the macro paradox of development. A, that you may have some positive results at the project level, but not at the macro level. And it may be some crowding out effects, leakage, or simply too small. If you try to measure it at the macro level, there are so many other factors. So the signal in terms of red project is too small compared to the noise of all the other things that happen. I used to say that projects win the battles and policies win the war. So, and that was when red was supposed to also imply some change in policies. How can you explain this? Let me skip this. So red as an idea has been very successful. If you look at the climate negotiations, they say it's one of the most successful ideas where most countries could agree on this. And why has it been so successful? I think as an idea, not as necessarily as the great result. In the Niklas Stern, World Bank economist and then just called the Checker or something, Minister of Finance in the UK. Funny name for him. He made this report in 2006 that was in front of the Stern report. We have it as mandatory in the climate, of course, we have economics. But big, cheap, and quick, kind of a summary. You can do a lot, the opportunity cost, forest conservation are low, and it can be done relatively quickly. Just a more tabloid summary. This idea of pests was kind of appealing. You only pay for results. If you don't perform, you don't pay. Simple as that. And it gives you strong economic incentives, both this incentive part and the compensation part. Incentive, cash incentives for them to do, and it's also fair. If you as a poor farmer in Kalimantan Barat, you reduce it, okay. We shall compensate you for that, so you shall not suffer. Good idea. It was also focused on national policy. They are more important in projects. You avoid this leakage problem. Insert something here, and the actors just move to another area and deforest the leakage, which can be quite large on study on the provincial level. I think they came up with around 40% leakage. So it is a concern. It's also, I think, some concern. You have normally the polluter pay principle, that's standard environmental. But here it's kind of pay the polluter principle. You have reversed it. Because you may be paying someone who are polluting now to stop. So some have said it's like you have a crime prevention program. So you start paying the thieves to stop being thieves. And that is, questionable. But at the other hand, you cannot apply the standard PPP. Don't confuse it. The polluter pay principle. You cannot apply that to kind of poor farmers and ask them to pay. It's like who has the initial rights to the forest. If you say that, okay, you own the forest and you can use it as you want, I should pay you for keeping it and provide that global public good by storing carbon. It was a vague idea that could accommodate many interests and agendas and parallel to sustainable development. You can be against sustainable development. It's like, as the Americans say, it's a motherhood and apple pie principle. You cannot be against it. So the actors, there are different interests. When it started, with as an idea in Brazil, called avoided deforestation, it was, Brazil has had a lot of reductions in deforestation and forest emissions. So we should be compensated for that. How can we get a large transfer? For some of the, it's called Annex 1 developed countries, it was how can we use RED as an offset? We can take our commitments, but we can buy some or we can offset some of those emissions by buying credits, like we did in this CDM, Clean Development Mechanism, under the Kyoto Protocol. NGOs have projects, and they could kind of rename and modify them slightly to protect this surveillance. So it was different interests, different groups that also some direct benefits from the RED program. And it's also the need for success in climate negotiations. And I remember one of these COP meetings, I asked someone, how is RED negotiations going? And she said, well, it all depends on the other areas. If it's going bad in the other areas, we go back to RED and get some agreements, some new things because we want to show some success in that. So it was kind of an important to show that here we can agree, the North and the South, some progress. So RED has been evolving from an initial focus on carbon and payment for environmental services, this result-based payment, global national level, and it has moved down to the local level, somewhat good. But also the aim has changed with its climate policy. So it's both more non-carbon benefits, like adaptation, biodiversity has been included, and also not just PS, but also more general policies and measures, because plastic car and it's expensive too. So let me just sum up and talk a little bit about the future of RED and more climate in general. Not to look into the crystal ball because I don't have one, but some ideas and what the trends might be. This core idea, the textbook idea, result-based payment, has been, I would say, a key element of that. Sometimes we're asked, I mean, when CIFOR we did this work, what is the RED project, by the way? What is RED? And, well, we have the Bali definition, but the way it was defined, it's one, projects, policies, programs, where a major, not the main necessarily, but the major objective is to reduce emissions from forests. And the second requirement, there must be some kind of conditional payment, result-based, some element of that in that. So it's not just, say, a protected area without any of that kind of result-based payment. It's not RED. That's, how we have chosen to define it. So this is, I would say, a key idea. Incentive that we believe in, at least, although there may be other things, and compensation with fairness perspective. It's hard, and it's also insufficient funds to make it. For example, in Brazil, they have a formula, 10 years average as the baseline, and then $5 per ton of carbon, defined in 100 tons of carbon per hectare, and so on. Brazil has received about 6% of what the formula said. Guyana, the percentage is 22 of the verified results. So if you really want to do it, it's very costly. Because there is a lot of carbon in the forest. And in a tree, think about it. 100 tons, 1 hectare, 100 by 100 meters. Yeah, 100, maybe 150, depending on the forest in Indonesia. CO2, you have how much? Multiply by 3.67, so we are up to 300. Let's say 400. 400 tons of carbon. I don't know what the average emissions are in Indonesia, but I don't know. At least in Kalimantan. It's an average per capita. But in Norway, it's about 11, maybe 4, 3, 4 here. But say if it's 4 in Indonesia for the average person, and being, you're probably not an average Indonesian, but if you're poor and if you live to your 100 years, you only need to save 1 hectare of forest to offset your lifetime emissions. So it's not that difficult to be carbon neutral. Just say it, but just to illustrate that it's a lot of carbon in the forest. When you think of that way. The minimum saving for each of you Indonesians, I have to save 3 hectares. So I have to offset mine. Just going back to this agreement, contribution agreement, which is an addendum to the other agreement. So they say result-based contribution is for a portion of national level. So it's not full payment. And if you are good neoclassical economist, you are marginal, it's the incentive on the margin that matters. So if it's only a portion that is paid, so if you do a little bit more, you should be paid. That's kind of the basic neoclassical economics. But if it's only for a portion and it's based on how much the Norway has put aside, it's not really binding constraint how much you do, but it is the budget allocated to that. So will it work? If you are a strict, brainwashed neoclassical economist, you would say no, it will not work. In practice, I think it still works, but I'm still not brainwashed. So I still believe about the marginal incentives. So that is a problem, that if you want to get serious, you need big money, not the 1 or 2 billion that is allocated every year, but multiplied by 10, 20 billion per year. And we are not near to mobilize that amount of money to really do that serious. And that's a major problem. What's called nature-based climate solutions is coming up. So it's not just avoided forest conversion as here, but a number of things. Reforestation programs, natural forest management, improved plantations, avoided wood fuel, fire management, agriculture, grassland, biocarbon that you put in the soil, trees and problems, so you see wetlands, coastal restoration, a number of things that may be close to 40% of the cost-effective climate solutions in this decade. 12 gigatons of CO2 compared to global emissions roughly 50. So big part, more than of the mitigation potential is in looking at how we deal with nature, not just fossil fuel emissions. Big and bold initiatives, the limits of projects. Projects are good and needed, but you need some big projects. Brazil did some drastic deforestation reduction, reducing agricultural subsidies, more policing, etc. India, this fiscal transfer, where the transfer from the federal government to the state is based on forest cover, and big money being allocated every year to that. The Indonesian moratorium on forest conversion, licenses in forest conversion should have been. Ethiopia has huge restoration plans, at least for the internal trouble, to have. So you need some of these kind of bold initiatives that can really work on a large scale and trade environment, which is in general environmental economics, is a strong focus. Carbon tariffs that you can do. Norway cannot implement carbon taxes in whichever country you look at, in other countries, but we can have tariffs where we tax import based on their emissions. So it will be like carbon tax in the country. Standards, supply chains, EU ban very recently, and the drive for deforestation-free supply chains. The private sector initiatives, both by investors, by the companies, consumer sector, is, I think, something that we'll hear more about, and that is very in Europe, with EU setting kind of high standards for and linking it to trade. So trade has a major kind of vehicle to impose stricter standards and supply chains, free supply chain, and then to see. And then the final point, be brave and assess impacts. And I say be brave because impact assessment, maybe for us as researchers, is kind of harmless to do. But impact assessment, what is being done is kind of storytelling by donors or companies, opponents, or the beneficiaries. But impact assessment is much more rigorous approach that we need to do. Problem is, and I think it's like article by Lance Pritchett who said, it pains to be ignorant, that it's harder to, if you are serious about impact assessment, you may end up with a conclusion that, well, this policy really didn't work. And then you risk losing funding. You may embarrass yourself in public because you said the project failed. It's a risky to do that. So we need to know more about what works and what doesn't. And that leads me to talk after the break, maybe a diagnostics of how can we learn more about what works and what doesn't. So I don't know if we should have any questions for the break. Happy?
Yeah, maybe we can the question and answer section at the end. So we will have a break for like 5 minutes. Okay for you? Oh yeah. Thank you. So we will have a 5-minute break, and after that, Faril will present the second topic. Thank you.
I need a second. Kept my chair warm. Maybe it's not needed in this country. It's yours. Yeah. The top. The top. Yeah. More or less the same, but it's yeah. I think we work for things when you know everything about watching today, so I got good idea. So the presentation at this point, maybe it's nice. It's one of the challenges. Yeah. 1800, so it was happening around but wanting to get started. And I said no, and I know these presentations are the founder was giving the presentation, and then was the perfect question. And the driver was saying, no, this is a very simple question. I think I leave it to my driver. That was actually the question. But I mean, I read it. I can't believe it. Yes.
It's the story.
Fail, but it was smarter than saying that. No, just by the get out of there. Measuring the world, but and I will go travel that and measure. And then to the university, and those big nice those all that. Yeah, of course, I was traveling those. Very concentration that are people up there. No, if I have for most, I think since I can, unless that years, I think most years I can, years, most of those years I can finish. No, it's a long story. Yeah. But it depends if there is something to do, a lot of meetings, and yeah, because it's really everybody it's in Germany and Central Europe. It's low cost of living. But I think it was very nice organizing this year because it's more than just doing it. And it is something very different to be in public people than to get that just yeah. So hello. Bye. Happy. So, deforestation diagnostics. It's a term I think we haven't trademarked it, but it's there's some suddenly reduced impact logging was used, and suddenly some came and say, you cannot use that term. I have trademarked, so you cannot use it. But we haven't done it, so you're free to use it. I think it's a very useful term. So, diagnostics approach. What is it? Can I? Okay, let me start introducing. So, diagnostics is if you go to the doctor and say, science sakit panas, but you can have, there's 100 diseases you can have fever from. So, the doctor would have to start asking questions and maybe doing some blood tests and listening to your heartbeat and blood pressure and different samples to looking if you are sakit malaria or dengue fever or just masking or COVID or whatever. So they do kind of have a diagnostic to determine what is your illness. And then after they have done that, they give you the medicine, treatment. And we would like to have, for something it's no good treatment for COVID, it's not, but maybe some. But There are some treatments that are working. Panadol, you can get it because having high fever is can be okay for your body. Just the immune system is working, but you may have it. So there's some policies that may be like Panadol. It's good from a lot of diseases. Others, I don't know. Consider I got when I had malaria. I don't know, it's still used. But you can have consider it helps for malaria, but not for COVID, not for dengue or whatever. So you have diagnostics and then the pipelines. This is, I mean, doctors use this Bayesian approach where you update the probabilities based on new evidence. The more information you update, what is the probability that this medicine will work? So you give a prescription. In economics, we have the work of Daniel Gottlieb, one of my favorite economists, and Ricardo Hausmann and others, growth diagnostics. That is very basic. Here we have a problem of low economic growth. What are the constraints? What are the bottlenecks that we should work on? Not to have a one-size-fits-all recipe that sometimes is used. It was one-size-fits-all was stated during Christmas, 1997, and the World Bank, IMF, was a lot of standard. Oh, you know, we have a crisis to cut government expenditures. And that was not really the problem. It was a house or a real estate bubble. It was it was a crisis monetary, not just a crisis economy, where the banking sector, so you should address it more specifically what the problems were there, rather than just how we have to slash expenditure, kind of some austerity measures that are in the back of the head of the economist. So that's a nice report. In other political science, Orion and Ellen Ostrom, who got the Nobel Prize in economics, also have this institution like diagnostics of how, in a particular context, we have different attributes of the resource user, the resource system, etc. So you have some traditions of that. I think what we are wanting to take it to the deforestation context and apply this diagnostics approach. So it's a method for figuring out the policies are likely to work. Maybe you move the picture so it doesn't hide. Oops. Yeah. Okay. And then one back. Yeah, it's for figuring out what works where in a particular context. What is the case? What interventions are likely to work? So it's like finding this middle spot between sweeping generalization, it's one type of thought, and an endless stream of unique restricted case studies. So it's like a marriage between neoclassical economics and social anthropology, and the giant result of that marriage is diagnostics. It's an idea I got when I had a presentation in Denmark and for anthropologists, that this is kind of a nice way to see the case study, very kind of thick descriptions by anthropologists, and this one-armed speaking demonstration that some economists tend to do. It's easy to portray economists, but most of us are not like that. But the caricature economist. Is it working? So that's what deforestation diagnosis. And you may not work on deforestation, but you may think, I think it's also very nice approach, not just limited to this, but can be applied to a number of things. You want to stimulate small businesses. You do a diagnostics. There are very different types, different constraints, and therefore different policies that will work that you should have to stimulate them. Or you want to stimulate head of department, stimulate publishing department. Why aren't keep publishing more. It depends on the stage in their career, the type of research. For some, it's data and money to go to the field and collect data. For others, it's just time to do that. Others may need some help with the statistics. I mean, to collaborate with a statistician, etc., etc. So a diagnostics approach, what are kind of you have a general problem, but there are different archetypes or stylized description of what the problem is, and different interventions, policies, measures that will work. So in the deforestation context, this can be an even more generic one. You have the archetypes complex that you have defined here. You have the policies and measures here, policy typologies, and the third and more tricky part that we really have started much on in the project is what works where. So policy P2, how does it work for this? Maybe not that well. So it's to find, are there some Panadol that can work across the board? Or is there some more Ansidan or other more targeted problems that you can use if the problem is that you have high fever? So for policymakers, I think it's a nice tool to identify what Oren Young said, they keep the elements of individual problems that are significant from a problem-solving perspective. So it's not just a general description, but also problem-solving that is the problem. So what attributes of the cases are relevant to spot it out? Learning across similar locations, also across national borders. So there may be, we have a typical situation in West Kalimantan, but it may also be very similar to the situation in Peru. So what can we learn across those types that across the oceans? It's not to replace kind of the local context, in fact, but to build on that. So, as I said, this is a challenge between both ecology and economics. Case study researchers, if you work in a case, it's good to locate your case within the larger world of cases, and what are the critical factors that make my case perhaps unique. And if you are doing this meta-analysis, it helps in the application of studies and provide kind of some to identify what will work where and why. So I give a couple of examples. When I came to Indonesia just after my PhD in '97, we started a project called Economic Models of Deforestation, where we looked at trying to synthesize 150 studies already at that time about it. And it was a lot, but there were two things that had kind of mixed evidence. One was agriculture technologies yielding higher yield, technological progress, as manifested itself in higher yields per hectare. The yield is already per hectare. So production per hectare is yield. Remember, that was a reviewer comment. You shouldn't use yield per hectare, because yield is already per hectare. Because it's careful when using yield is per hectare. Which affects dumbness? You have two effects. If you take a standard profit maximization approach to this, higher profitability, higher yield, technological progress, higher profitability, you expand. And this is referred to as the Jevons paradox, one of the founding fathers of neoclassical economics, studied coal use in London, that you got machines that use the coal more efficient, and people thought, aha, we're using coal more efficient, should lower the use of coal, which was a major pollution problem. What happened was the opposite. Coal increased. Why? So you got more energy out of each kilo of coal. So it was kind of cheaper to use it in terms of the energy you got out of it. Jevons paradox. And you have it in a lot of areas. For example, seatbelts in cars. make people drive faster. So it doesn't reduce the risk as much because it has behavioral or market impacts. So you find that in a number of areas. Energy saving mechanisms or devices, you should say, talking in Norway, I would say you increase the temperature inside. Maybe here it's you lower the temperature inside your house. But you also have it associated with the Norman Borlaug, the father of the Green Revolution, who said higher yield, you need less agricultural land. So these two opposite effects. And after this, I worked also at CIFOR at that time. We published a book on agriculture, technology and deforestation, where we trying to say, okay, the impact of agriculture yield depends on X, Y, Z. What exactly does it depend? So we have this smallholder subsistence-oriented farmers, commercial farmers, low market access integration, small and large markets. And it's linked to someone said it's the elasticity theory. So the demand elasticity, what type of market are you working in? We have this just a simple kind of demand diagram. If you supply increase or shift to the right, if we have technological progress, or in a world where we have perfect inelastic demand, this is the Borlaug world. So you have to feed it. Obviously, if you have this, and you have technological progress, it's not shown that is in here, but you lower the prices and you produce on less land because same quantity produced. If you have this perfectly elastic demand, you're producing for a global market, so you're a price taker, you move here and you increase the quantity and you expand your land. So the type of market, are we in the Borlaug world or are we in the Jacob's world of perfectly elastic demand? Another example that we looked at was also uncertain was what's the impact of tenure? And that's a standard kind of, you may find in the textbook saying we should give property rights to farmers, communities, and they will invest more in forests and take care of them. But deforestation, forest conversion is in itself an investment. And if you have more secure tenure, it makes investment less risky. So you have these two opposite effects here, the kind of the standard one, but also if you think of this as an investment opportunity, and I, on my PhD thesis papers on exactly this balancing here. So what we have hypothesized is that it depends on some contextual factors, what is available there, how is forest rights or property rights to land strengthened or granted, if it's with forest clearing or not. And you find examples of both this in different contexts. And you may also have other examples. Building a new road provides better access to the market, higher prices, and more profitable, but it may also provide more job opportunities that takes away from activities like agriculture that involve forest degradation. So, kind of the need, and I used to tell students when they say it's a complex question, and I say for every complex question there is a correct answer, and the answer is it depends. If you only write that, you get a D. Hooray. Because you have to say it depends on what. And that's kind of the trick of kind of diagnostics approach, a lot of science where we have it. So here we try to do it more systematically. And the first step, as I said, defining the archetypes. So defining archetypes is a lot about identifying the diagnostic variables, just like you go to the doctor. Blood tests can be diagnostic variable. Looking in the microscope and you see you got malaria. That did in real with me. 98. You got now 91. You got malaria. They looked at it. So the diagnosis was over. And so we have this nest. So what variables to include? Are they relevant to include? If I also played a bit of volleyball at that time, that I had hurting my finger was not relevant. I was sick, but having pain in your finger is not important whether you have malaria or not. So it's not a relevant variable. Uniqueness. Is it unique or is it correlated with other variables? And of course, data availability, that is a major constraint. So we have this nested approach that I will explain here. The landscape attributes that are the forest cover change. Good data, kind of easy to classify. Drivers of change. What are the land uses after the forest has been converted to something else? Risk factors, we looked at accessibility and accessibility. We would like to include this, but there's no good global data set. Well, for protected area, there are some, but we need also to work more on that. The governance aspect. So here is a complicated one that you have 10 seconds to digest before I explain. And so, first level is the land cover data. The forest cover and the loss of forest cover, deforestation defining severity. We also use one, the activeness, and the timing of this. Was it active before or after 2015? So activeness, more than 1% of the land converted from forest to something else per year. 1% per year, then we are defining as an active or as a hotspot. And then the state, which is by the end of 2021, forest cover and forest degradation, you find the gaps in the canopy of the forest. So we ended up with 8 types of forest. We have this forest landscapes with a lot of forest or some moderate levels, and where you have a lost here, hotspots, most of them, and we have this sparse forest landscape. So a lot of forest, process of forest loss and limited levels of forest. This nested approach is where we look at both the drivers here of change and also the risk defined here. We look at some other characteristics of it. So let's start on a bit more on the data. Here's just some of the definitions, the metrics used. We use this data set, that data, that is kind of the basis for a lot, but the data do not speak for themselves. We have to do some massaging and analysis and to clarify to this is the data that we use. But it's one of the many products from the landscape used by the government, the Rishi and most search. We aggregated to 5 by 5 pixels to get a landscape. Originally, I 30 by 30, that's part of the detail to give a meaningful analysis. And you can get a map that is rather gray because it has some colors together. So this threshold that we define forest cover within this 5 by 5 kilometers, how much of that area is covered by forest, deforestation, the loss we have, degradation of the holes in the canopy, and the activeness, as I explained, 1% of the land, not of the forest, the land that is lost every year, annual date. And you have to take 3-year average because you have some noise in the annual data, or there may be close or deforestation risk, just the data here, agricultural suitability, and you do Hadiladan, Sava, range of major crops here, and accessibility, travel time to a big city of at least 50,000. And drivers of change, what are the composed forest land uses from different data sets, population data, etc. So, it's a very dark. It's much better like here. So maybe these are better. So this is not the archetypes yet. So this is just to combine the data on forest cover and deforestation here, and it's different. And well, this is a lot of work that we can see at least. Let me see if it's better for the next. Yeah, it's a little bit. So this is the same forest cover and degradation. Of course, Java. I know you don't have a lot of primary forest, maybe, but we here, and I stay in real without here, real jungle border. A lot of this eastern part, some of the western chain here is some that is big baby forest, what is like, and some areas come out quite low in that. But let's move to the archetypes, which is kind of the main. This is the hotspot, which is a bit clear where we have the active frontiers, the dark green here. I think one of the interesting findings that you have a lot of active hotspots. We have a high deforestation before 2015, and it continues. We have a few old ones, which is kind of what you would expect because deforestation rates have dropped the last few years. So we have more old ones than emerging this purple color that we have some in West Sumatra and in Albania here. But yeah, we have a lot. So this persistent deforestation that we have active, and it seems that you have started a process. There is some health reinforcing loops. It's harder to stop it because, for example, we build a road, you get a market, you get migrants moving there, get some economic activity, a local demand, and a lot of this self-reinforcing loops, multiplier effects, if you like. Here are the archetypes, and what we used was this idea of a forest transition, a river proposed by Alex Mather and some colleagues in Bogor that did on the forest transition forests. So we start here with very high levels of forests. That's kind of the core forest type. And then you build a road, you build transmigration from the past, plantation, very profitable crop stuff. And you go downhill here with lucid forest, and eventually you reach a level here. A couple of several things that may happen for this turnaround here. Forest getting scarce, you may be more concerned about the forest, but it's also economic development where you provide the development provides alternative employment opportunities, so you move out of agriculture and happen. This is not kind of a deterministic prediction, but it's a pattern that has been found in Europe, North America, Vietnam. It's kind of hard here. Some countries in Central America are also at this stage, whereas you are at different, maybe Indonesia, someone tried to build the different islands, where Java is here, Sumatra is maybe here, Kalimantan here, and Papua here still. So it's a useful, I think, conceptual tool to think within. And we used it to categorize the archetypes, as I already presented to you here. Here are the characteristics that you know. This high forest, where some of actually happening with active, and you also have the gradual deforestation process. I start with Latin America, the Amazon. 60% of both world. You see, 80%, roughly speaking, of the Amazon is still in the forest. But we have the arc of deforestation of cattle and pasture and soil of the erosion into the interior, and some around the river, the Amazon. Africa, we have a similar, not a similar picture with a lot of West Africa along the coast here. A lot of that is deforestation fronts that they have lost a lot. You have Liberia here as an exception to this picture. Partly explained by the war. A war seems, an internal war seems to protect forests. But someone said it's the most expensive way to protect forests to have a war. And I agree with that. But DRC, where you have some in the south here, and even palm oil being brought there, and including Indonesian companies are and other foreign investments operating here. But a lot of that is smallholder farmers and production. This part of the world, as you can see, a lot of the forest in the interior here, and if you look at the whole Borneo and Indonesia here, you have a lot from the coast, from the access to the market. So some kind of continuum theory seems to be working also at a large scale, where access to port, market, rivers, roads seems to be right. And just look at slightly more on Indonesia, and you can see the pattern here. I think it's so. Some have said this forest transition going clockwise. You go from Java, Sumatra, Sulawesi, and all the way to Papua, Irian Jaya, as I still like to call it. I don't know, because you don't have a name for the whole Irian Jaya. It's not Papua, because there's just one province, isn't it? Yeah. So, I don't know if it's correct to call it Irian Jaya still. Anyway, but the picture here, so the idea behind this is, okay, you have quite different situation with kind of past deforestation fronts, maybe it's stabilized, maybe you don't need strong medicine there, this is medical metaphor, this persistence, how to do, what are the most recent ones, and also how do they kind of go from here to here to study what has happened in these recent ones that we've been. It's hard to kind of see the colors is actually in the computer. And what has happened in this area? So it would be very interesting to do some local studies, those recent ones. What triggered it to start, and what can we learn from those? So I think it gives a good map to kind of moving from the space satellite to going down and checking. And that why? We looked at some of the characteristics of the archetypes of this core forest. First, it's still a lot of forest in Indonesia, in case you didn't know. Almost half, according to this, but it's, I mean, you have a lot of forests here, so this is not a precise measure of forest cover. It's just how many percent can you calculate as core forest with high forest cover loaded. Of course, this forest also when you so it's actually but this deforestation front or frontiers or hotspots, whatever name you fronts, that have this persistent and also past that it has slowed down in 2015. But forest loss different with action. Accessibility, of course, more forest is protected by being far away. 14 hours by car to the nearest city is 15,000 people. And, you know, for commercial farming, at least. Population density a lot lower as expected here, but kind of surprised to see the high population density in this area, but quite near the average of the whole country, and even higher here as expected. population growth high in this area, so it is really booming areas. This is compared to this here, and also this is moderate forest landscapes. So you can learn a bit about drivers, and this is where we still have to dig into with Timo and Sandy and many others. If you look at by province, of course I haven't. This is not the most recent map of provinces. Has been further divided. But Papua Barat were very high levels of forest and kind of the usual as you would expect down to Jakarta at the bottom in terms of forest cover. And you may look at where you have this ranked by summarize these three, the forest fronts, where is it, and Bangka Belitung and Sumatra Selatan with very high levels. But then you find some funding things. Bali, I was in 91 and it was not a lot of forest land even. But why is it so high? Maybe some noise classification you have to look at, which is typical when you get this satellite results. You need, it's not just plug and play, you have to need critically. This that have been a lot of attention, Rio and Jambi, and Rio, where you have a few more past deforestation fronts, but Jambi is more the central action, where you also have a few recent after 12% of the area of Jambi that is like this. Nested archetypes in terms of dominant drivers. The pattern is quite different between the take really the global picture here between South America, where we have a lot of termless grassland. The grassland is not just empty grassland, a lot of this will be pasture. And the rule of thumb is saying that 80% of deforestation in Brazil is from pasture expansion. Soya is good number 2. If you look at Africa, what is also this grassland, which is kind of more subsistence oriented, more in agriculture than is strong, but increasingly I mentioned some commercial crops and palm oil and others. What is interesting for Indonesia or Malaysia and further north is tree plantations. Yes, most of it would be palm oil. It would be nice to have maps to overlay it to see, but seen some studies, palm oil is some studies 30-40% of the deforestation is from conversions to palm oil. So it is important, but sometimes you think it's only palm oil. It's not. There are still smallholder and other crops that are being planted on land that has been converted to forests. One last point before we can have some questions and discussion is on the risk of doing that. And two things: you need to have access to some markets. On Chile told us that 200 years ago, and you need to have some suitable soil. So this suitability index that is used for rain and agriculture. And we have what is constrained here in the ground. It's constrained, or sorry, it's at risk from good access. And this is what is at risk because it's high agricultural suitability. For this, we can do something. We, Homo sapiens, can do something about. This is not given by nature. We do something indirectly by affecting the global climate. So here is the kind of those areas that are constrained by or are at risk because we have good access, but we have low agricultural suitability. And this maybe some passive protection, and some are low on both. So one point is that the interior of the elemental here is quite common passive protection here. Maybe if I was policy looking more at this area, they have good agricultural suitability, but at the moment low access. And this is what I learned, at least that where we find it, I'm not here in South Africa. That, and I also understand there are plans for palm oil development where it's relatively flat, very few people live, so it's low population, so we lack the infrastructure and market access, but one can do it. But if you do that, much of this will be at risk, both by commercial development, but also by more kind of unplanned, spontaneous deforestation. So, to me, that's at least something I learned, that where are the more risky areas. So it's a different situation if you compare the two green hotspots that we have here and here. This more passive protection because of, well, we have low accessibility, but also the agricultural suitability is relatively low. We have the opposite situation, or a different situation here in Papua or South Papua. Okay. How are we doing on time? So, policy psychologists, we're working with a colleague on that and try to have kind of a similar archetype approach. And just jump to this slide then. We're trying to classify, how to classify policies. And you can have very theory-based, it can be very pragmatic. We have tried to look at three mechanisms. One is the kind of psychological or behavioral mechanism that is activated. Just maximization of material claim, but you also have this more psychological thing that is self-determination theory that has been used a lot in behavioral economics to explain why you get how people behave in experience and so on. You have the producers targeted, producers, supply chain, consumers, but also the investors, financial sector, and governments. And finally, the more the underlying causes. A bit linked to this forest agricultural rent, expansion of forest activities, agricultural rent, and this more forest rent cost, and then some more indirect. So we have combined them and tried to classify in a way that I think has not been done, with using a similar archetype approach to policy classification. So we'll get it here. Then we are to gather all the evidence, which is the third part, what works where. Just to say that this is some idea inspired by some philosophers that also work in my department. We have basically three ways of knowing. One is theory-based. We are establishing some causal chains. One problem with that is we have many theories, and which one is correct. So you need to combine it with evidence, RCTs, quasi-experimental methods, and you synthesize them into large meta studies. And the problem is that these kind of syntheses are not kind of defining the context. So whether it's for drugs, you generalize across populations, men and women, ethnicity, age, and there are differences that you don't take into account. And it's similar for a lot of these things which we see, they don't take context. We want to do this by having a bit more kind of when we do this synthesis, we also try to specify and link it to this archetype that we talked about. So this policy was tried in this archetype may be correct. In our best case scenario, we're able to say, okay, this policy PS worked, this archetype, not in this. And we get some good conclusion. Probably need to supplement with this. The third approach, say more anthropological, is to have a good kind of thick case studies where you really know the details. And problem, of course, and it is one. So there's a joke saying only anthropologists are allowed to generalize when ended is one. But combining these three, I think we stand a good chance of filling out the matrix of what works where. And I think having worked with interdisciplinary research, to have respect for the economists of good generalizing, there's a lot of people working here, and a more logical approach where you really get to know your case well. So the diagnostics approach, to conclude, kind of this mid-range of theoretization. One side it's all about the saying like this about adults, and finding the middle ground to increase prediction and usefulness. And Daniel Budwick, in his paper in 2010, it's called Diagnostics for Prescription, which is kind of obvious when you hear it. Think about going to the doctor. That we should do, but he said that we should become diagnosticians. That's what economists should be. And he provided a framework for that. We do. And I think indirectly we are. So kind of my idea and my mission is to say that, okay, let's try to do it a little bit more systematically to become good doctors. Maybe I shouldn't using this medical metaphor, it's a bit more top down, because it's not that we are coming to tell you what to do, but you need also this knowledge from the bottom up and combining these three types of knowledge. I think the archetype analysis is you see a few studies and it's a growing field. New data, new tools, artificial intelligence. I used to say that we also need human intelligence. And what we did when we used some artificial intelligence, and this is called, learn a new word, SOM method, self-organizing maps. So it's like a cluster analysis. You throw in a lot of data sets on different characteristics, forest cover, vegetation, population densities, may have some economic data, accessibility, and positive reward. Throw it in and let the computer organize it into maps. And the maps was a mess. And this category for the clusters did not make that good sense. So, yet we need our brains. And what we used was this forest transition. In other cases, we may need others, but it was more, it wasn't a lesson that, okay, human brains are still quite good. And as I said, as a more generic method across fields, and I kind of like this idea of that this is how we as economists should, in a direction that we should move on diagnosticians. So, thank you so far.
Thank you. Actually, I forgot because you give us a great presentation. Okay, so the question and answer session, we will take a question and maybe comments also from one in person, and also who join us virtually. Anybody can help me to identify. You can raise your hand so we can give you the opportunity to give question or comments for those who attend online. Okay, maybe I will give opportunity to the one who okay, Ibu Yaitu and others. Okay. Please. Thank you. The context of this diagnostic, I think economists I mean, in the forestry, much of discussion, also in policy making, and I don't know if this sectors like auto-regulating or not, or when you mapping also deforestation and forest cover, we need to target it more of like the context of like high deforestation in the area of high deforestation and high forest cover, given that it is not replaceable of what is actually in the context of nation. The policy process itself in the forest sector before is like decentralization at the local level, and then going back to the national and certain time, and then going to provincial level. Is it at that policy context, or what is it actually? Because my area is so decentralized. What is it actually? How to balance the one side or via the uniqueness that might need to be incorporated in certain region or in certain type of forest. What is your experience that you are already following Indonesia since you are PhD? Complex.
Yeah.
I don't know, it's interesting, but you know, we always going back and forth in terms of policy making, and also the old policy. There is not much of like that lesson learned that really advocating, more of like positive, but not quite really conclusive.
Right.
Please,
Okay. Actually, my first Indonesian student I had wrote about forest decentralization in Indonesia from 2001 or something.
yes.
Yeah, and started. I think, and I'm saying I'm not completely up to date on that, but let me start a bit more general. I think when you talk decentralization, local management has been kind of a strong move to say that that's a way to better protect the forests. I think first you have to distinguish between decentralization, because in Indonesia you have 5 levels, maybe you have 6, you know, from national to province to department, kecamatan, desa, and maybe even households. You have a 6th level there. So decentralization, if it's just to the province or kabupaten, it's still a bit far from the household level. So what do you actually mean by decentralization, or devolution, or otherwise? You may still have decentralization and still being far from the 6th level, the household and the individuals. That's one. I think the experience with Indonesia was, and let me say that just, it has been also questioned by a lot that decentralization is often, you cannot think that it automatically will give more forest conservation. That's clear. So it's not kind of a recipe, and that in many cases it has not led to. I think one problem I remember from the early studies of the decentralization is you're decentralizing and giving more kind of responsibility to them, but how can a local government raise money, raise revenue for their budget? And that's not by forest conservation. It's more for the HPH and to allocating and licenses and selling that out. So the incentives for a government, and they're concerned about the budget and the development activities, the incentives are not there to kind of stronger than that. And that's what you see in a few countries, that maybe this national central government is more preoccupied with conservation, environmental issues than the local governments. At least local governments at the kind of, say, provincial or kabupaten level, that is still away from level 5 or 6, or even kecamatan level. So I would also to look at this, what are the incentives for the government? Say if you had, like I mentioned, this fiscal transfer as a mechanism that India's tried that was discussed, where you actually get allocation based on how much you do, or we have red programs where some share of the carbon credits that is generated within your say, department can be allocated to the government. They have an incentive. But my immediate response, what are the incentives? Where can they raise money for the budget? Which is a primary concern and very legitimate. So for the Bupati to do that. And if you don't have that incentive structure in place, you cannot expect decentralization to lead to more forest conservation or sustainable use.
Yes, it's actually like the context of the forest area, the policy is environmental, but like forest preservation in terms of like tourism and understood. The incentive at the local also not quite. It's like policy making is not there, and it's not like the things that can transform. I think now I think that they are already given that the government also thinking about sustainable finance. They might also thinking about the climate reality in the governmental transform. Then the case of the revenue side is also need to be considered again, even at public presence. But what it's still in the context of the prioritization, balancing the one side is all, and how it's actually the this level and connecting to the case study. Sometimes, like even for overall case study, what kind is actually extracted from those knowledge and the interdisciplinary discussion is still very, I don't know, maybe I'm not aware of it, it's very little with this in many areas.
And then if you are standing and you're more up to date policy development in these areas.
Any questions? Comments? Maybe, yeah, nobody. Maybe my questions somehow related to Buri and questions. I'm wondering about what are your suggestions to mainstreaming the RED policy in local government? I mean, like, what are your suggestions to increase the awareness of the local government, especially to implement the RED policy? As you know that provinces in Indonesia has their own unique characteristics, and and the policy is not only at the national level but at the local level. And we know that the local government has responsibility to reduce the carbon emissions. So that's all my questions.
These are difficult questions. You know, I was between my master's and PhD. I worked a little bit in the Ministry of Finance and Energy. And one of the reasons I left was that I found it hard to give policy advice and talk about that, especially to be a scientist, and you don't need to answer those questions. But still, first, I think a lot of research, to go from research to policy advice, it's a long step, and we shouldn't take lightly on that, because you need this type 3 knowledge, really good on the context. I can say about the kind of the main idea of RED was that you should make it's like a concept of Pareto improvement. some winners and no losers if you have reform. So it is that it should be this incentives and compensation for all decision makers. The problem is there are so many decision makers, from the farmers to the community to all the 5 levels, 5, 6 levels that you have. So in a way, in an ideal world, you have a benefit sharing system where, say, carbon credits that are raised is shared and by all those involved. So we have an Pareto improvement to speak economic language. So how to get that? And I think it's important because politics in Norway or elsewhere, that if there are some losers, they are often able to block it and in the implementation chains. So you need kind of to make all winners of this, and that's the core idea. So what I would look at if I were to study is to see how this benefit sharing how is that allocation, and make sure that their budget, that they get to share. So it's in their interests to do that. That's kind of the whole idea, but to construct that in practice, it's more. And I think in a way we need kind of these careful studies and see fairly practically, if you do this, if you allocate, as I understand this, local HPHAS is allocated by which level? Province level. Yeah. So that if they do that, if that's the most beneficial use for their to raise revenue, well, we still have some way to go if it works like that. So finding this balance and trying to make as many as possible as winners is kind of. But this is a very general answer, because I think if you are complete, you really need this very context-based knowledge. But that can be a guide agency.
Yeah. So just adding from what Ariel had said and about the just adding from Ariel and a comment from Bu Riatu. Oh, okay. Yeah, and so of course this work will still ongoing, and then so I myself still comprehending, getting a better understanding about the methods and everything. And if I can borrow again the medical metaphor, say if the problems in the forestry sector is a rare cancer, and then we are aiming to develop drugs, like very specific drugs to solve this very specific rare cancer, then for using, for example, if we take ecological fiscal transfer, if we learn from India, they use forest cover as one of the indicators as a formula to deliver their fiscal transfer. But in Indonesia, maybe it's not really, because there are provinces with high forest cover, but there are also provinces with not forest cover. While at the same time, the ecological fiscal transfer must be all-encompassing. But how do we try to take into account the fact that there's some province with jurisdictions with higher forest cover and some are not. So yeah, if I understand correctly, Bu Riatu wants an example maybe for how do we.
That's maybe what we say. Our regions similar base, it might be considered more as general allocation like transfer. But I think this might be in the context of like specific kind of sectors. Given that in yes, in Indonesia, the incentives still not quite there and might be even the reverse.
Right. Yeah, and if we take into account the different context of, say, mitigation in area A and area B can be different, even especially adaptation in coastal area, we will need policy A, and in mountainous area, we will have different kind of policy. So, yeah, it's challenging, but I myself am interested to see how it's going.
Well, this is one question for me. What are your opinion about the current implementation of REDD in Jambi? In Jambi in East Kalimantan, and what can we learn from that two provinces to other provinces in Indonesia, and what are maybe lack or what are the improvements that should have been taken in the future? The question how you want to.
Yeah.
Okay, so we can.
Yeah,
Okay. So I have several questions. We expect to finish in 20 minutes because we have players. Usually our lunch is earlier than the days. First is about the price in the press. So paying someone to do something, it actually depends on how the seller agree with the price, right? So if the price is not actually incentivize the seller to do certain things, actually the deliverables will be there. Yeah. So I wonder about the pricing mechanism, because we can have price in terms of, for example, ecological transfer or international to government in Indonesia, which is maybe different from in the market, like for trading in the private from the business union, and then incentive for household also possible. So how's like the pricing determined, and how to make the pricing is right to make people to do that thing, yeah, because for example, yeah, for conservation is actually the actual cost is low, much lower than for example reforestation, for example. But the problem is the opportunity cost in each spot in Indonesia is very we can have various opportunity costs, and how it included also in any kind of pest mechanism, like including like EFT and also REDD and other things. So because I think it becomes one of I don't know key. If the price is not right, then I think the market is not functioning well. This is the first one, and the second one about the reference level. The reference level, I think, we don't like before and after, right? So we do a trend of business as usual versus a trend of actual, yeah. And then do we have like common framework? Because in Indonesia, there was a discussion about the reference level of energy. Actually, we set up a business as usual quite high because demand for energy derived from growth. And then, so we have a quite high business as usual trend. So we can achieve that easily, very easy, because the business as usual emission set up very high. So we can play with the reference level. So how we can look at the outcome then. And related to the outcome, I see that the ideal one, the outcome is the emission. But you say about the policy also become, I don't know, it is the outcome. So I don't know how about the payment if, for example, the government of Indonesia or local government set up a right policy like moratorium or others where whether the payment is based on the policy or expected outcome for the policy, some kind of that thing. And the last one is the now we have quite intensive discussion in certain groups on jurisdictional approach and whether I don't know whether I think like in the past, is it different between, for example, the seller and buyer include like household as the seller or private as the seller and local government as the seller, whether the behavior, you know, because like the government, what is the incentive actually when they get incentive and it is put in the state or local budget and the household, it comes to their own pocket and it's like whether the behavior response will be everything. Thank you.
Okay, I think we have to postpone answer all this. No, I will be rather quick. There were 3 questions maybe I'll wait back. Let me start in the reverse order. I guess your question about the jurisdictional approach, whether the incentives are different compared to a national.
Yeah, the seller is like using approach like government.
Yeah.
Government
Yes.
The
Yeah.
benefit of
I think the whole jurisdictional approach, I think looking from the donor perspective, not because I'm a donor, just taxpayer. It was kind of a way to, you had some kind of progressive states. Indonesia, you had East Kalimantan, and in Brazil, you had, say, the province of Acre, that was Acre. That was kind of right to if you have a government, say in Brazil, that it became popular to kind of bypass less environmental friendly. So that was one reason. The other was kind of thought it's more efficient, closer to the people in the forest if you work with subnational units and you can pick some regions and more focused. Yes, I think it should matter, as you say, where it does, but I think you cannot bypass the national level either. You need the kind of the consensus, and therefore the benefit sharing system that Indonesia put in place some years ago was a way to kind of balance the interest between the different levels of government, and that is needed, and also further down from the provinces to the next level. So it is, but it is a tricky balance, and I mean, to give a good answer, I would need Type 3 knowledge more to really look into the cases and how it's distributed and what will be the revenues for the governments at different levels for different alternative uses, and really do some simple accounting of that. I think would be very useful to see and to clarify and say if you have some fiscal transfers, how much would be needed in order to kind of shifting that. So some simple, it's a good master, maybe even PhD thesis for you to, for some of your students. I'll be interested. So I don't look backwards. The other question was on FREL, the forest reference emission levels. You have FRL and EL, emission adjusted forest reference. There is some guidelines from the UNFCCC on how to do this, but it's very vague. For example, one thing I didn't mention is national circumstances. Countries may adjust them. Normally, you do an historical average. You can do a trend, so you choose a period. And as I showed for Brazil, it has a huge impact. Indonesia, a bit more tricky. can have a trend. Remember Peru in the previous one had an upward trend, so they included that. Now it's more flat, so there's no trend. So, and then the national circumstances, what on earth is that? And they have not defined it, so it's a kind of a black box thing in what it means. But some countries have used, for example, if there is some peace in Colombia, you don't do that. So I think reference level is just, it should be credible and it should be based. And I think it's also something like MRB should be some independent verification. I think in an ideal world, there should be some kind of expert judgment. If it's reasonable, this forecast of what the deforestation would be without. I think also another one issue is to have consistency between reference level at the provincial levels and at the national levels, so they add up. So you both have you can set a national level and allocate to the provinces, or the other way, set a province and add up to the national. Probably you need to do both ways and at least have consistency between those. But it is a tricky one, and there's no one correct answer of doing this, because defining the counterfactual, we are working in a hypothetical world. What would be? And one problem, if you use historical, that is the average, as you saw in Brazil. No, you have done that for more than 10 years. So already the reference level have been contaminated by red policies, so to speak. So it's not longer business as usual. And what is business as usual, by the way? Is it to completely ignore the one? So the more I think about reference level, the harder. But try to avoid gaming. And one is one funny tweet I saw: a reference level is a benchmark set so low that success is guaranteed. You shouldn't do it that way. Because it is important how you define success, political success, and potentially how you get money. It should be the same person receiving them, or the same person, the same unit. Say a country set it reference level, and then it receives money based on that. I mean, the economic intuition immediately suggests that, aha, here we have a potential for gaming and biases in the way of sentiment. So now I come to the first question: was the carbon price? What is the right carbon price? And if I'm buying carbon credits from you, the right price is what both can agree on will be happy. So that's one way of looking. It's kind of a bilateral negotiation, and whatever we agree on is the right price. That's a very kind of pragmatic way. But the carbon price in the European market, ETS, emission trading system in Europe, has been close to 100 euros. And now we are paying $5, or say $100, more or less. And then we're paying 5 here. That's not fair. Or is it? So you can say that you have a gap between the opportunity cost of conservation for farmers or local governments and the market price. And everything between there, you say, if you negotiate, both would benefit from a trade between the opportunity cost down here and the $100. If it was in a carbon market, obviously there will be one price, and those with low opportunity cost will make a lot of money. But we don't have that market. So what is a fair price? It is a difficult. I choose kind of that pragmatic way. In a way, if you take a donor or a buyer perspective, or a more principal agent perspective, you would like to do price discrimination. Buy products with low opportunity cost, pay a low price. And in a way, you can argue that, okay, if I'm representing a donor representing the global world, the global community, I would like to get most bang for my bucks, most emission reductions. I shouldn't pay you more. I shouldn't pay him more than just to get him on board. You're a poor peasant in Rio, so I can pay you little. you have a palm oil company, so I have to pay you more. And I price discriminate, so I get the most bang for the buck, just paying what's necessary to do. That's kind of the principal agent way of thinking about it. So, is it fair? It's a very difficult question. What is the right price? Because you can choose different perspectives on that. And yeah, so it depends on where you stand. Jambi and Kaptim. Sunday, I learned from some presentations on Wednesday from Sunday on Ketinggalan and Barao project and on the impacts of that, and also one presentation or one representative from Jambi. But again, I've also been asked by some newspapers every now and then to say, what about this project? And I think I'm hesitant to do that because I know from experience that when you know a little bit about it, you have one opinion, and you dig deeper, you change your views. So to say something. The one thing about Jambi, I was kind of surprised in this biocarbon World Bank. It's a lot of money. He said $70 million by 26. They potentially can get to distribute. So that's something. Because there is a lot of, even if you pay just $5, it's a lot of carbon in the forest. That so just at $5, maybe 10 in the leaf, you can, it's a lot of money. So I think, I cannot kind of talk specifically about this because I should know a lot more before I do, but it seems to be taking off a few projects. We started, by the way, in 2010 with 23 projects across the 6 countries. Many of them were kind of paper projects. They never took off. They existed only on the websites in the cyber world, not on the ground. So the fact that they have survived and are still with us is kind of some sign of success, because many of those 23 are they're gone. So that's the first maybe success criteria. They're still alive. Okay.
So since it's almost up, we can close the section. Thank you very much. It was a great presentation and also discussion. I hope we can conduct this kind of lecture series again when you came to Indonesia later on. We will come again, right? Okay, so I think we can close this session by giving a big applause for Professor Ariel. Here. Okay, good day. Oh, okay. We have a token of appreciation for our activity.
So thanks a lot for the opportunity to be here, by the way, I've got to say, and it's always nice to be with students, staff at the university. Yes. Kalau saya kasih satu, dua, tiga. Ya. Satu, dua. Nah. Satu, dua.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Oh,
Yeah. So nice.
yeah. Thank you. How many humans?
But if you are
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so we have incentive based transfer, the dividend. But the problem is that not this most we promote the person to put in the video because they didn't know which we can put this kind of thing. Also proposal based for the but the one that in second base is the allocation is very small and they don't have new for like cost they have under the place which means very policy moving and the funding to the village indicators of our summer where there is actually whether it translates to increasing personal expenses. It is on all paper and it's been rejected so you don't know but if you want to do it yeah, I think they got the fund is their mind potential then given that war is not infrastructure. Yeah, the small infrastructure basically how many roads on full of it will need to die but it's so it's getting to now like that, having created activity like disaster. I think first and also and during the COVID-19 they used it at least like 55% of the for like support for families. So I mean like by allocating 2015, but before there is like different one that so it's 1 billion
Or building population.
1 billion.
It depends, we have indicators, but around that.
So there are some station and not that they
Would like to change and
not that they give up, but I think it's fun. Yeah. Thank you. So,
I use it.
and we,
Now we
Yes. Yeah.
for example, this is the concept or it doesn't have any government.
Yeah.
But it's like, stakeholder consultation, sit down and talk, which is yeah. I mean, you also did it in art, but was there's always what is the same, and then it's 20 years ago. It's like a heart. It's I think setting platforms that's how they can make what is doing. You say people may have some solution and they can get some better. It's not the that's primary stuff, but so looking at how to do that before, it's very actually so I included that, not just sitting and talking. Also, like how that is implemented, you can say that, but he said it's a lot of, very knowledge, a lot of learning, or, bias, capacity building, and development.
so this project is
That you have a proper advice, some considerations, and you like this to look at.
it's like
So you have this first also, for example, in this one, remember you had a
yeah. So social assistance. So we can insert But what is the conditional law? Now it's not the and this guideline or forest. But the problem is we only put like for conservation is actually much lower than compensation, but the problem is that we haven't put cost and consumption basis. I think, but I think for the study, this immediately quite what kind of feature should be indicated. Maybe consumption cost of that is different from communities how maybe should like
They're working. Both conceptually defining.